And we're back. It's a new day. I had a little think last night about our roll bar, and I already want to make some changes. I also went down and grabbed my seat and stuck it in there to get an idea what the seats are going to look like. So what I want to change, I was thinking about that forward lean that we ended up with yesterday, and I think it looks really cool. Like visually from the side it looks great, but it brings this top bar closer to my head and more or less over top of my head. This is going to be a street cage, so I'm not going to be wearing a helmet in it all the time. It's not designed to be a full roll cage. It's more of a roof structure. So I want to keep those tubes a little ways away from my head so I don't brain myself every time I get in and out. So I think what we're going to do is actually cut this cage off. It's only like 8 tack welds. So we'll cut the hoop off and then regrind the bottoms to bring it back up to vertical. And that'll give us a little bit more separation on the top. It'll also kind of work a little bit better with what we have planned for the rear half of it. So that's going to be the first part. The other thing I did or noticed was our harness bar is in completely the wrong spot. It's about 4 inches too high to mount harnesses to, which is unfortunate, but we had to put it there due to where the bends are on the hoop. So we're gonna leave it there and we're just gonna stop calling it a harness bar. It's now just a crossbar, and we can either put in another harness bar later or look at mounting the harnesses directly to the chassis. So we're gonna leave that there. So let's cut those tack welds and regrind that hoop. So we got that tack back on at a little less of a jaunty angle. Gives me a lot more headroom up here, and it just pulls this bar away from my head. So I'm happy with that. Next step, moving on to the front hoop. The way it was sitting, this hoop was basically level with the rear hoop. So our roof would have been dead flat, and I don't want that. I want a bit of a rake to it. So we're gonna cut these off. I think we're gonna get about a 3.5 inch rake front to rear. So we're gonna cut that off at the bottom of these tubes, and then those tubes should end up being about perfect size for little nubbins to weld onto our mounting plates on the front there. We'll weld a couple of tubes straight out of those mounting plates, and then we'll fish mount this hoop right onto those. So I got the bandsaw set up. We'll cut this up. All right, we got the ends cut off of our front hoop here. So this is basically final dimension. We still have to do the fish mouths because we're gonna come. These are our little nubbins that we're gonna weld onto our chassis plates, and then we're gonna bring the front hoop down onto them like that. So we need to fish mouth the front hoop. So what we're gonna do for that, because these nubbins have they're welding onto an angled surface, we cut that angle into them. It's about a 10-degree angle. So when we weld them on, they should be basically linear across the car. It should be straight across the car. So we should be able to fish mouth our main hoop on the bench here and just grab another piece of tube and lay it across end to end and mark out our fish mouths on that. So I'm gonna give it a whirl. Hopefully it works, and we'll fish mouth that and then tack our little nubbins onto the car. so we got the front hoop tacked on. It's looking good. So now we got to look at tying the front and rear hoops together with just some straight bars across the top. And then we also need to look at our rear down bars. So I got 2 of these bent up when we were up at Trigger. These are a 65-degree bend on a 3.5-inch radius. And they're meant to be our rear down bars. I got one just kind of clamped up there right now. I put a bend in them. I know they're supposed to be straight, but if they go straight, we end up with like a really short trunk, or we have to anchor them to just body work at the back. So we sized up our tubing, so it's a little stronger. That's what the SCCA rules say, is if you can't have straight rear bars, to just size up your tubing. So we sized up our tubing, we put a bend in it, to give us a little bit more space. But it looks a little bit sharp. So the only die that Trigger had, or Landon up Trigger had, was a 3.5-inch radius, which is a pretty tight bend for this kind of aesthetic. So I talked to my buddy over at How's That Street Legal. He has a 6-inch radius die, so double the radius. So it should make for a nicer, smooth transition. So I'm gonna grab a couple of spare bars that we have kicking around, go over there and bend those up, and then we can see about making this shape. So I'll catch up with you guys once I got those done. And we're back. Took a little bit longer than I thought last night to bend these up over at Brennan's house, mostly just because we got BSing about cars, but so by the time I got home last night, it was way too late to film it. So I got these bent. This is our old one, this is our new one. So these are at 65 degrees and these are at 75 degrees. So a little bit more angle, but a much more gradual curve on them. So I think that'll look better for the back half of the car. So I got one kind of clamped up there. Unfortunately, I don't know what the mounting point is gonna look like at the bottom, so we can't cut these and weld them on yet. But we can do the top bars. We can fish mount those and get those welded on, and that'll kind of tie in the cage. And then if we just have these bends kind of handy as we're building the back half of the chassis, we can make sure that our angles are right and everything, and then we can adjust for a couple of degrees here and there when we actually go to weld these on. So I'm gonna leave these back bars until later, but we can do the uppers. So let's cut those to length, fish mount them, and get them tacked in. All right, there's our second one. I skipped over it. It's more of the same, just a bunch of grinding and fish mouthing. So we got 2 of these bars done, they're identical. Now we need to measure up and put them up top. We need to find center point on both of our hoops and do everything off of center. I don't have a good idea where that is yet, so we're gonna measure between bends. We're also going to probably throw a level on it and see if we can get a center point based off of the chassis. And in the end, we'll probably just eyeball it a little bit too. Get our center point and then measure, I think, about 3.5 inches off in both directions. And that'll be where these guys will go, and we'll tack them in. All right, we got the top bars tacked in place. So now everything's tacked up and ready for finish welding. But I'm gonna call it an episode there. We spent 3 days making one episode, so I think that's enough. We got all the tubes tacked up. We got those rear bars bent, so we can work on the back half of the chassis and have a reference point, so that's good. Next episode, I think we're gonna move back onto steering. I wanna get the steering rack mounted, because once we get that mounted and a steering column, we essentially have a roller. We don't have shocks or anything, but we can kind of mock those in. So once we have a roller, then we can set this thing on the ground, and that'll be pretty exciting. So that's my plan for next week. In the meantime, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe button. Go check us out on Instagram, Leftfootfirst Media, and we'll see you next week. I'm out of here.